The new colony of New South Wales could not progress without the inclusion of a top government lawyer and representative of the Crown in that role. In 1823, Lord Bathurst wrote to Governor Brisbane in Sydney that an Act of Parliament in London had been proclaimed and that a Chief Justice of the new court would immediately go to Sydney and take up his office there in the new colony. The two previous judges, Field and Wild, were to be recalled. The man replacing both these judges as Chief Justice would be Francis Forbes, and we have a street named after him in Sydney, of course. I'm Michael Beashel, Australian historical fiction writer, and here is a picture of the Chief Justice of New South Wales, a man of high influence, intellect and high character. Francis Forbes was a child prodigy. He saw his role as one to educate people who perhaps didn't have his abilities. But that didn't mean Forbes was an elitist or arrogant or superior. The opposite was very much the case. He liked games as a child that challenged his mind, and he liked to equivocate, to be the adjudicator between quarrelling parties from a young age. He was born in 1784 to a family of doctors in Bermuda, which had migrated to Scotland after the Battle of Culloden. He was educated at the bar in London and returned to Bermuda in 1811 to take office as Attorney General and practiced law there until 1816, pretty good part of the world. He then went to cold Newfoundland and he had an altercation with the governor who, according to Forbes, was not his intellectual equal. Unfortunately, Forbes suffered ill health and returned to London in 1822 until Lord Bathurst called him up. Forbes was to have relationships in a legal sense with governors Brisbane, Darling and Burke. So he was a thread right through those three governors and was to come into contact with our usual players, as mentioned before, MacArthur, Campbell, Wentworth and Marsden, so forth. And because he was Chief Justice, he was at the forefront and usually the initiator of all the contentious bills that were seen in the last videos, like land rights, extension of the Legislative Council, establishment of the Executive Council, education, treatment of the convicts and immigration. Governor Darling unfortunately had the ear of John MacArthur. John MacArthur wanting his own footprint stamped on the colony, as we've seen many times, and it has to be repeated because it was so important. And MacArthur started rumours that Forbes had said that Darling was a close associate of the press and would do what they asked. Now Darling was incensed by this. How dare Forbes think about this? And without seeking the facts of the matter, drew closer to John MacArthur. Forbes was in fact a little bit like Macquarie. He thought that there was a better purpose in placing convicts in Botany Bay as a penal settlement. He considered there might be an ambition, and I quote, "A colony of Europeans in the heart of Asia," he said. And because of his education and his intellect, he believed that the majority of people should be raised to a level where they would be able to enjoy making their own way and improving themselves. The Chief Justice had the invidious position of having to be in the middle of contentious trials and calumnies, and as an officer of the court, he had no leeway to whether to assuage or to sit beside or agree with any particular party, but had to use the law as the basis of his decisions. Now, this was not to say that his intellect did not allow him to see the legal nuances of certain situations and arrangement, but he had to conform to the law. Now, one of the items that interested him was education, and in 1835 he recommended that people in London should press for the married mechanics with their wives and children, the married farm servants without children, for unmarried farm servants and unmarried women to come to Sydney. This was all very laudatory and fine, but unfortunately there had been a boat-load arrivals filled with women of dubious repute, and Forbes had difficulty in selling this new venture to the people and politics of New South Wales. He became ill towards the end of his stay in New South Wales, but he sailed for England on the 21st of April 1836. Now, he not only witnessed the approbation of the usual middle-class merchants, but also of the road gangs when he left Sydney. They all cheered him on at the harbour entrance and wished him farewell. But according to the sarcastic comments in the Sydney Herald, and I quote, "He sailed out on the high seas, cheered by convict clamour and a host of transported Jews." Nice. So the Herald was friendly towards the MacArthur Group and against Forbes. But when Forbes departed, he had a letter in his pocket from Governor Richard Bourke, who recommended to Lord Bathurst that Forbes be recommended for a knighthood, because he had been a fair jurist and he had given freedom to the press and wanted free institutions and a free society. And he was a Whig. Don't forget, he was a Whig like Governor Bourke. They were very much together. After recovering somewhat in England, he returned to New South Wales, having retired from the office of Chief Justice in July 1837 on a pension of £700 a year. He returned to New South Wales, but then again the press cruelly mocked him. And like Macquarie of his time, the press said, and I quote, "As a man who sold out the birthright of an Englishman for a mess of pottage in a royal palace, his one-time friends and convict levellers of New South Wales had posted the word scab on one of his trees in his property." Great. He died in Newtown on the 8th of November 1841, and the Australian newspaper eulogised him as most upright and impartial judge of fearless assertions enabling the liberty of the press and the people and enlightenment of their children and education. So that's a short story of Francis Forbes, Chief Justice of New South Wales during the important times of the early colonial period. I'm Michael Bichel. Bye for now.